Under much of Britain lies coal. Not all of it so deep as to require traditional collieries to mine it. More than 10% of the nation's coal is won by the National Coal Board's open cast executive. 14.7 million tonnes in the year 1982-3. And here is one of the Coal Board's largest sites, Meadowgate. Worked between 1976 and 1982, it has produced a total of more than 1.5 million tonnes of high-quality coal and has been transformed in the process into the Rother Valley Country Park. The site, of a total acreage of some 907, is bounded on the western side by now closed railway lines. At its southern end lies Killarmarsh. Before open cast working started, the land was used for rough grazing. At its southern end, there was a small nature reserve. It was a scene of considerable dereliction, some of it caused by underground coal working in the past. A cottage on the eastern edge of the site was to be converted into staff accommodation once the park has been completed. Bedgrave Mill, too, almost in the centre of the site, was to remain and to become the future park's visitors' centre. The old railway embankment with its bridge over the River Rother once served the nearby Norwood Colliery, now closed. The river was grossly polluted, frequently with an offensive appearance and smell. It was incapable of supporting fish life. But there was coal, lots of it. The National Coal Board were ready to mine it. In the 1960s, Sheffield City Council planned to build a new overspill area not far from Killarmarsh. The creation of recreation facilities, sparse in any case to the east of the city, was considered at the same time. Having to provide additional floodwater storage capacity in the valley because of the new housing, a large lake for water sports could be created at the same time. The idea of the Rother Valley Country Park was born. In the summer of 1976, a hot and long one as it turned out, work could begin. The first task at any open-cast site is to establish an access road from a surrounding highway. Before the large excavation plant and machinery used in modern open casting could be deployed, the site had to be properly fenced and prepared. When the site was officially handed over to the successful contractor, Lehane, Mackenzie and Shand Limited, a site meeting was held at which local farmers, landowners and residents could meet planners, local authority officials, contractors and coal board engineers. Although in essence the working of an open cast site follows a regular pattern, strip topsoil and store, strip subsoil and store separately, and then remove the overburden to reach the coal, each site offers its own special problems. Here, at all times throughout the operations, the valley had to continue to be available for flood water storage. Almost the first job, during the long and almost tropical summer, was to prepare for the diversion of the river, under which much of the coal lay. Near the railway embankment on the western edge of the site, the topsoil was stripped and moved to be stored, followed by the subsoil. A new bed for the soon-to-be diverted river was being prepared. Temporary bridges were built across the river, still on its original course, so that heavy plant could progress from one side to the other, to where the soil dumps are, without leaving the site boundary. At the northern end, the overburden was moved, the strata that lie between the subsoil and the coal. By the time the board's contractors left the site, 23 million tons of overburden were stripped, moved, stored, and replaced. Soon, under what was to become the course of the temporarily diverted river, the first coal was reached. In tight, compacted bands, the coal had to be scored and loosened by a ripper with claws to make loading possible. This is old mining country. The site was surrounded by collieries, old and new, some closed due to exhaustion, others with a long and active life still ahead. The high hazel seam outcropped hereabouts. During the 1926 general strike, local miners dug their coal here. Killermarsh was once a mining village. Chatting under the cross in the churchyard of the parish church of St. Giles and the Cross, for centuries the villagers' meeting place, were John Whitfield and Jermyn Haslam, both ex-miners. The site was bisected by a bund along the line of the old mineral railway embankment. It demarcated the line between the northern and southern areas of the site. The valley is part of the washlands storing water from the River Rother in spate to prevent flooding of the River Don. During the whole operation, it had to continue its function as a flood plain. At all times, the site has to be capable of storing nearly 1 million cubic meters of water. The new housing nearby will increase the demand by a further 250,000 cubic meters. To create areas that could be flooded should the need arise, and to get at the coal beneath the river, it had to be diverted to the site's western side, eventually to be moved once again back to its final position to become part of the lake and surrounding ponds. The temporary riverbed from north to south, 2,300 meters long, followed a shorter course than the original river. Its gradient is steeper and the water flow greater. So, in each half, here at the southern end, weirs, spillways and new drainage structures had to be installed, so that at all times one half of the site was available for floodwater storage, while the other could be mined. In the early autumn of 1977, the new riverbed, with the railway embankment just to the west, was ready. The job of diverting the river could begin. An important event this, for no mining of real consequence could take place until the river had been successfully diverted, and the floodplain, just south of the bund, had been made secure. In the south, the plug, the barrier between river and diversion, was removed. With the railway on its left, the diversion slowly took the place of the original river. And now, to the south. By October 1977, the old riverbed was empty. The real job of mining could begin. The mill had to remain, so mining operations had to move carefully around the site, moving from north to south towards and then past the mill. An operation of this size needs many machines: face shovels, dump trucks, scrapers and graders. During the 6 years of mining operations, the 150 men or so who worked on the site moved nearly 750,000 cubic meters of topsoil, 1.25 million cubic meters of subsoil, 23 million tons of overburden, and finally 1.5 million tons of coal. To comply with the constraints of the site, especially its continuing function as a floodplain, the order of operations had to be planned and carried out with special care. First came the diversion of the river and the construction of weirs and regulators in the northern half. Meanwhile, an area just south of the mill and bund was excavated for use as floodwater storage. Then, while river diversion work continued, the northern half of the site was mined. Recontouring was started in the north as coaling was completed there. The river was diverted, the lake bed prepared and the bund removed. Finally, the southern end of the site was excavated, mined and recontoured. Dust suppression on every open cast site is a vital and necessary activity, and water is the chief agent. These water carriers hold 10,000 gallons. Refilled 10 times, each dust suppression unit can put down 100,000 gallons every day. The huge quantities of overburden moved and stored during mining operations, as well as the material excavated to construct the temporary riverbed, the lake and its associated ponds, were laid down to create the hills and slopes that will become part of the recreation area, and the she slope. Subsoil and then topsoil, carefully stored and tended for just this purpose, were replaced. The slopes were leveled and contoured to the required shapes. Then, before being sown with ryegrass to improve the soil structure, the soil was rooted and aerated. With mining operations in full spate in the south, to the north, work went on to screen the cokeworks and the nearby colliery. It wasn't long before the first green reappeared. Snow fell in February 1978. But despite the adverse weather conditions, work continued. Just south of Bedgrave Mill, 1,500 cubic meters of material were being removed every hour from a series of bench cuts. Spring, and at the northern end, very little evidence that only a year ago coal was being won. Edward Mallender, 86 years old and a keen gardener, was always interested in the site's transformation. Amongst his visitors was Peter Latham of Shands, who, like many others, appreciated this neighbour's interest. On the 9th of June 1978, when the site was in full production, 40 members of the Country Parks Joint Committee visited the site. There was much to see. The whole site lay spread before them. Here is the visible evidence of the joint work and cooperation between the National Coal Board's Open Cast Executive and its contractors and the joint local authorities. South Yorkshire County Council, Derbyshire County Council, the City of Sheffield, the Metropolitan Borough of Rotherham, and the District of North East Derbyshire, as well as a number of public utilities. To the south, Kilmarsh is on the horizon. Along the railway, running north to south. To the northeast, the restored slopes. The mill in the centre, and to the north, the cokeworks in the distance. Westwards, the railway. Now south again, Kilmarsh, and the circuit is complete. A transformation in the making, made possible by coal, the riches that lie under this land. The rich Kilnhurst seam yields its treasures, now well down in the south. The coal seams, the Top Hard, the High Hazel and the Kilnhurst, dip from west to east. Relatively near the surface in the west, at about 8 meters down, the deepest excavations in the east were 46 meters deep. There's no denying that while excavation is in progress, an open cast site is not a pretty place. But all possible care is always taken to minimize its effects on the community. Baffle banks are constructed on the boundaries and trees are planted to screen the workings. Before loading, the coal is cleaned. Here, as everywhere else on the site, the coal was brushed to remove overburden debris. Trimming the load ensures equal weight distribution for safety and to avoid spillage on the public highway. Safety at work is, of course, of paramount importance. For years, it's been obligatory to wear helmets on a coal board site. Each lorry's wheels and body are washed, and often when long journeys are involved, the load is sheeted. And then it's off for its 10-mile journey to one of the board's coal preparation plants, where the coal will be crushed and graded for the nearby power stations. As on every coal board open cast site, a liaison committee was formed. Meeting regularly with the coal board site engineer, Peter Creswell, in attendance, local residents and councillors were kept in touch with developments. New equipment and modifications were constantly developed in the interest of both efficient coal production and of environmental control. Noise reduction kits were fitted to dump trucks, and new, much less noisy compressor units developed, as well as dust suppression equipment. Weather stations on or near open cast sites have been established. They measure and record rainfall, wind velocity and atmospheric pressure as an aid to the control of site operations. As work on the site progressed, it was time to realign the river into its final position. At the southern end of the site, near the junction of the temporarily diverted river by the railway, the newly prepared bed for the river's permanent course is clearly visible. At the same time, the lake's bed was being prepared. While the southern part of the site was being excavated and mined, it would act as the main flood water storage area. Because the lake is at a higher level than the existing groundwater table, it could not be filled by gravity. A water regulator was installed, not far from the mill, capable of damming the river so that it could form a temporary reservoir, a settling pond, before the water was filtered and aerated. Eventually, it will be used to control the flow of the river and so help to prevent flooding. The mill will remain between new river course and lake. With Killamarsh in the distance, work went on. And so a safe and regulated river course, south to north, was created. A major problem in constructing a lake in a former open cast site is to make it leak-proof, especially if the site is underlain by old mine workings. It was decided to construct the lake bed, as well as the beds of the ponds and the newly aligned river, of an impermeable blanket of compacted clay. For this purpose, 750,000 cubic meters of clay had been set aside. Before the lake could be filled, the impermeability of the blanket had to be tested. Totally pollution-free water in the river could not be guaranteed, so water for the lake and other water sport areas had to be obtained from elsewhere. It was pumped from the Moss Brook near Eckington, 2 kilometers from the site. The day came. On the 29th of September, 1982, the chairman of the Joint Committee switched on the pumps, capable of moving 2 million gallons of water into the lake every day. When completed, the lake will hold 270 million gallons of water. It will occupy an area of some 43 hectares, be more than 1 kilometer long and more than 300 meters wide, with an overall depth of 3.5 meters. As work to restore the site and transform it into the country park continues, the final tons of coal are being won. Soon this area too, right on the edge of Killamarsh, will be restored. fishing lake and nature reservation will be sited near here. While sheep graze in the north and the grain is being harvested, proof of the improved fertility of the restored land, the lake takes its final shape, surrounded by gentle slopes, offering spectators vantage points for the many boating events that will take place here. At the northern end of the lake, there'll be another lagoon, a good deal smaller, for model boating and family rowing. Tree planting started in the autumn of 1978. Councillor Morgan Owen, then chairman of the Joint Committee, plants the first tree. Since then, 40 hectares have been planted, 150,000 trees in all. Roads, pathways and car parks have to be constructed, as well as a number of access roads to the park. The slipways for the permanent water sports centre are laid. There will be a 1,000-metre rowing course with 6 lanes here. There will be facilities for sailing a variety of craft. At the southern end of the park, near Killamarsh, there'll be 2 further smaller lakes. Nearest the park's boundary, there'll be a fishing lake, already stocked with roach, bream, perch and pike. Even more stock will be added before fishing starts in the autumn of 1983. The River Rother is on a recognized route for migratory birds, and before work started, there was a small nature reservation here. Now, a new lake has been created to provide a habitat for the many different birds that will call. A shallow shore of mudflats planted with marsh vegetation, islands and deeper water, trees to give shelter, and meadowland around it will provide a home for a variety of wildlife. When the site has been fully developed, there'll also be a picnic area, 4 football pitches, a riding trail, camping and caravanning facilities, an 18-hole golf course, guided walks and nature trails, catering, and a ski slope, 20 meters high and 100 meters long. This whole development has been made possible by close cooperation between the National Coal Board and the local authorities. The nation has won its coal, and the many visitors to the country park will be secure in their recreation and pleasure for many years to come.